Morning, everyone.
Good morning, Rabbi.
We're learning Mishnah Yeshabes, Perek Yud, Chapter 10, Mishnah Daled, Mishnah 4. I'd like to dedicate this morning's learning in memory of my mother, Mrs. Shalamas Rabinowitz, Shalamas Bas Rabbi Yaakov Eliezer. Our learning should be a schus for her neshama. All right, a quick introduction. I'm going to read it to you here from the Art Scroll because it's said very, very, very well. The Torah refers to the Melachas of Shabbos as Melechas Machashavas. Now, Melechas means work. Machashavas comes from the word Machshava, which means think. So the wording that they use is, for the way they translate Melechas Machshavas, is calculated labor, from which it is derived that a person is liable for performing a melacha only if he intended to do so. So Melechas Machshavas, literally translated means work of thought. But that means they use the word calculated, but it means in the very least you have to intend to do what you did. There are going to be other levels of that also. That as we're seeing in the Mishna a little bit differently than we would have thought, intended means. Maybe that's where the word used calculated, because calculated means kind of very thought out, or it implies that. But the point is, for instance, not that this Mishnah is going to talk about it, but this is a classic example of where you need Melechas Machshavas, you need intention. Is if, let's say, there was a fruit on the ground, you thought it was detached, so you picked it up, and it really was attached, so you detached it as you picked it up. Now, in that situation, it's not like I realized I was detaching, but I forgot it's Shabbos. Or I realized I was detaching, and I forgot that detaching on Shabbos is forbidden. I didn't even intend to detach, but that's what happened.
You intended just to
pick it up. I just intended to pick it up. My intention was a perfectly permissible action. It came out being that I did an act that I had no intention whatsoever to do. That's called misasek. Misasek means you were involved in one thing, meaning thinking it was going to be this, and it came out being something else. So a person from misasek is pater. You're exempt. That's not called desecrating Shabbos. That's not called I did a malacha. So that's your most simply explained. That's your most simple case of a lack of Melechas Machshavas, a lack of calculated activity where you had no intention whatsoever to do what was done. I mean, you had no intention to do the act of the malacha. Now, our Mishnah is going to take it a step further, where we're not going to say so much that the act I didn't mean to do, but it came out in an inferior way than I originally planned. So it's not like there was no intention to do the act. The intention was to do the act in a certain way, and it came out being in an inferior way. And that too is going to be considered it's not going to be considered Melechas Machshavas. I can't call it my fully thought out, my calculated labor, because it came out in an inferior way. I didn't intend to do it in this inferior way, and it came out inferior. We'll give an example. But it came out inferior, and therefore that takes away from my intention or my calculation, my activity. What's the example? The Mishnah says like this: one who had intention to transfer an item, he was going to take something from a private domain to a public domain, and his intention was to take it out in front of him. That means it was going to be suspended from him. It was going to be, he's going to be carrying it in a certain way that it's on the front of him, and it's the normal way to carry this thing, suspended from you, and you wanted it in front of you. And before you finished doing the malacha, it basically came out being on the back of you. So you wanted it in front of you, and then before you finished the malacha, it ended up being in the back of you. Okay, there we say pater. There we say you're exempt. Because when you carry something in front of you, you want it in front of you because you could watch it better. If it lands up behind you, it could fall off and you're not going to realize it. So you're trying to do the transfer in a way that is, let's call it superior, in the sense that you want to carry it in a way that you can guard this thing better. At the end, before you finish doing the malach of transferring, before you finish the transferring, it landed up basically swinging around and being behind you. And by the time you finished completing the malacha, it landed up that the act that you did was done in a way that was inferior to your intention. It came out less than what you really wanted. Then we say pater, that's exempt. That's lacking in malachas masheves. That's another level. Of course, you intended to transfer this thing, but the point is you intended to transfer it in a certain way, and it came out in a lesser way. That's a level of lack of intention, and therefore you're exempt. However, la'acharav, let's say when you slung it out, when you suspended it from you, you suspended it from behind you, which means originally you put it behind you and you didn't care that they're not going to be able to watch it as well. And then before you finish doing the transferring, it moved around. If it came in front of you, now it's in a better situation than it was before. Chayiv, then you're liable. Then it is considered that you transgress Shabbos. You did the malach of haitzah. Although I didn't intend to have it in front of me, but clearly since being in front of me is better, and therefore I'm pleased with that, that is going to be considered malachas masheves. That's considered intention for what I did. Now the Mishnah continues. Be'emes amru. In truth, they said, which is a phrase that means that this is not argued upon. Ha'isha chageres besinar. A woman who is wearing, they call this an underskirt. That means under her, whatever she's wearing another garment, and it was done out of modesty. Apparently, it was a very loose thing. And this is a case where she decided, and apparently for some reason this is still considered normal, because if it wasn't normal, you wouldn't be chayiv anyway, that she attached something to that underskirt while she was, going out. And she had it in front of her, right? She had it in front of her because she wanted to have more control over it. But this underskirt moved, and it came out being behind her before she finished transferring. So ha'isha chageres b'sinar, a woman who is wearing this sinar, this underskirt, bein milfaneh bein milachareha, where the object suspended from it is in front of her and back of her, chayeves. Either way, she's going to be liable. She has transgressed haitzah. Shekain roy liyos chayzer, because it is very normal for it to turn around. Meaning she started it in front of her, and that's where she wanted it. It landed up, the skirt landed turning around, and the object suspended from it was behind her, which means it's in an inferior place where she wanted it. The only thing is that it's so normal, it's so common for this underskirt to move around that she knows it's going to happen. And therefore, even though she put it in front of her, she knew all the time, really, it's considered she knew all the time that it could move behind her. And therefore, it's considered like she intended it for it to carry it behind her, because it's so common to happen. So you can't say, I only intended it to be in front of me. You know it's going to move around, and you know it's going to land up behind you. And therefore, it's considered that she had it's considered melechas masheves, a calculated labor, because of the fact that this is going to happen. Now, Rabbi Yehuda says, af makabli piskin. The same thing applies to people who receive royal letters. That means that there were these people who worked, they were these message carriers for a king or for whatever nobility we're talking about. And the messages, these letters, they put them into these hollow wooden tubes, and they would actually suspend it from the front of them, meaning they'd hang it around their neck, and that's how they carried it. So Yehuda says, there too, these things, they're Pony Express, and they've got this thing, around their neck, and the things are moving around, and it moves and it moves around to their back instead of being in the front. It slings around to the back. Rabbi Yehuda says even those people who originally wanted it in front of them would be chayav for carrying on Shabbos, even if it were to now land up behind them, because Rabbi Yehuda says this too is considered common enough to say that you always knew it happened, you always knew it would happen, and therefore it's considered that you had full intention to that. But if Rabbi Yehuda says it, that means Tanakama disagreed. Mm-hmm. And the explanation to the Tanakama is that, the Tanakama holds that, we might think this, it sounds pretty common, pretty normal to happen, but apparently it wasn't that common. Apparently, they didn't necessarily take a wild horse that made them jump around so much that it should sling behind them. It was something that could happen, but according to the Tanakh, according to the first opinion, not common enough to say that you knew this was going to happen, and therefore it was included in your attention to begin with. And the halacha is not like Rabbi Yehuda. Have a wonderful day.
Have a good day, Rabbi.
Have a good day, Rabbi.